Okay, today we'll discuss all about S3 security. Like always, I'll try to explain in detail with hands-on using CLI as well as using UI. So let's get started. First in the list is bucket policies and block public access. But before that, I want to teach you a bit about Etags and checksums. Now I'll take you to my terminal. Now if I write AWS S3 API list buckets, it is going to give me all my buckets. For those who are not familiar with this command, I have made a dedicated video on the basics of S3 CLI. Without watching that video, you won't be able to understand S3 CLI commands. I'll put the video link in the description. Please watch the video. The main goal of this video is to explain S3 security. Anyways, this command is used to list all the buckets. I have two buckets in this account, Cloud Newbie 1023 and Korlagautam 1023. For suppose if I want to list all the objects in the Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket, I'll write AWS S3 API list objects -- bucket Cloud Newbie 1023. Okay, there is only one object in this bucket, that is rocky.png. Look, there is a etag for this object. So what are these etags? Etags are HTTP response headers that represents a resource that has changed or not without requiring to download the object. The value of etags are represented by MD5 hash function if the object is not encrypted. But if the object is encrypted, AWS won't use this simple MD5 hash function to generate this etag. So, etags are useful when you want to check whether the content in the object has changed or not, programmatically or through CLI, without downloading it. Now let's learn a bit about checksums. A checksum is a calculated hash value which is used to verify the integrity of the data during transmission. And S3 uses this checksums to verify the data integrity of the files. And so, if the data is downloaded or manipulated or lost, checksum determines it. Algorithms like MD5, SHA-1, SHA-256, CRC32 generates the checksum from the data in a file. So, etags are for our reference, whether the data in the object has changed or not, and checksums are for AWS reference. AWS allows us to change the checksum algorithm used while uploading the object, and it does not allow us to change the etag algorithm used. So now I hope you could able to understand the relation between etags and checksums. Now I'll take you to my terminal. If I write ls, okay, I'll create new file and add some text to it. I'll now write echo hello movies and add this text to cloud.txt file. When I write ls, there is cloud.txt file. Now I wanted to check the MD5 hash of this cloud.txt file. For that, I'll write MD5 sum cloud.txt. When I hit enter, I got some random text. This is the MD5 hash of this cloud.txt file. Okay, now let's change the contents in the file and verify whether the hash would remain same or not. I'll now write echo hello and add this text to cloud.txt. When I again try to verify the MD5 hash of that file, I got a different hash. So, hash will change when we change the contents of the file. So now let's try to upload this cloud.txt file to that bucket. First I'll try to list the objects in that bucket. I'll write AWS S3 ls S3 / Cloud Newbie 1023. There is one object in this bucket. Now I'll try to copy this cloud.txt, AWS S3 CP cloud.txt and my bucket name. And the file was successfully uploaded to the bucket. Now I want to view the etag of the object. For that I'll use S3 API command to list the objects. I'll write AWS S3 API list objects -- bucket and Cloud Newbie. When I hit enter, look, the etag of the cloud.txt file in the bucket matches with the MD5 hash of the cloud.txt file which we have found previously, which confirms AWS uses MD5 hash to generate etags. Okay, now let's try to change the checksum algorithm used. I'll write AWS S3 API and hit enter for the auto prompt. I'll use put object to upload an object. -- bucket Cloud Newbie 1023 and -- key. Let's upload the kgf.sh file and -- body the same kgf.sh. Look, if you observe, there is a checksum algorithm. If I select that one, I can use SHA-256, SHA-1, CRC32, CRC32C. Okay, there is no MD5 over here. This is because AWS by default use this MD5 checksum algorithm. If I select SHA-256 and when I hit enter, look, I got checksum SHA-256 etags and server-side encryption as the response. Okay, this is how you change the checksum algorithm while uploading an object to a bucket. You can verify this checksum SHA-256 that was generated for this file in your local. That was an activity for you people. It's not a big task. You can do this in the same way that we have verified MD5 checksum for a file. Okay, now let's take our first step to secure objects and buckets in S3. Firstly, let's learn what are access control lists in S3. ACLs are one of the oldest ways to manage access to resources in S3. Using ACLs, one can control who can access your S3 buckets and objects, and also what actions one can perform, basic operations like read, write, list. ACLs are defined at two levels, bucket level ACLs and object level ACLs. So, in one line, ACLs are used to define who can access the objects and buckets and what actions they can perform on these. They are like permission slips. Let's say you have a bucket in S3 and that contains some sensitive files. Now if you want to give a read access to user A and write access to user B, now I'll take you to my console to explain this. Okay, these are my two buckets in my account. If I select the first bucket, there are three objects in this bucket: cloud.txt, kgfsh and rocky.png. If I select this permissions tab in this bucket, now this page is for setting permissions to this bucket and objects inside this bucket. We have block public access, bucket policies, object ownerships. We'll look everything in detail in this video itself using CLI. Here we have ACLs. What they have written here: grant basic read-write permissions to other AWS accounts. Look, there is something called grantee over here, which means to whom you want to give the permissions. And first, the bucket owner has list and write permissions to these objects and read and write permissions to this bucket. In the same way, you can give permissions to other AWS accounts, you can give permissions to other users. Users can be AWS users or any other users over the internet. You can give permissions to the group of users. Okay, now I want to edit these permissions. The edit was grayed out and there is something written here. This bucket has the bucket owner enforced setting applied for object ownership. When bucket owner enforced is applied, use bucket policies to control access. When I go a little bit up for the object ownership, there is something written here. Bucket owner enforced. ACLs are disabled. All objects in this bucket are owned by this account. Access to the bucket and its object is specified only using policies. For me, it sounds like
ఎవ్వడేం పెట్టినా నా వెంట్రుకు కూడా పీకలేరు. నా జీవితానికి నేనే రాజు, నేనే మంత్రి.
Just joking. So by default, ACLs are disabled. And if you want to give access to other AWS accounts or users, you have to use bucket policies. When I click edit, look, ACLs are disabled. This is recommended by AWS itself. Now I'll click this ACLs enabled button. Oh, I got big warnings. Enabling ACLs turns off the bucket owner enforced settings for object ownership. I'll acknowledge this and I save settings. Okay, successfully edited object ownership. There is one more thing written here. Public access is blocked because block public access settings are turned on for this bucket. I think I can't make the objects public without turning off that block public access. Let's try. Let's click on this edit button. I'll click this list objects for everyone and I'll also click this read bucket ACL for everyone. If I select this button, anyone in this world can read these ACLs, and that's why this write option was disabled. Now do you understand why these ACLs are not used by anyone now? And why AWS don't recommend using these ACLs? Okay, when I select this checkbox, when I click this save changes button, there is something wrong with this. You don't have permissions to edit ACL settings? I'm root. I think I have to turn off that block public access. I'll go up, I'll click edit. I'll now uncheck that block all public access. We'll discuss what is this. When I hit save changes, okay, it was asking me to confirm. I'll write confirm. When I hit confirm, I'll come down. I'll click that edit button again. I'll again select this list and read. I'll select that understand checkbox. When I hit save changes, okay, successfully edited access control list. Okay, in this way you will give permissions on buckets and objects to others. Okay, I forgot the main purpose. We have to give permissions to a specific user, right?
చెప్పేది ఒకటి, చేసేది ఒకటి.
I'll again select that permissions tab. I'll go down for this ACLs. AWS don't recommend granting access to everyone. Okay, I'll click edit. Now I'll click this add grantee button. It was asking for a canonical ID. Okay, I can select this list and write objects and read and write bucket ACLs. So a person or an AWS account or anything having all these permissions can list, upload the objects as well as read and write these bucket ACLs, which means the person or AWS account can change these permissions.
Very dangerous.
Okay, what is this canonical ID then? Canonical ID is the owner ID. Select your name on the top right corner and click on this security credentials. This navigates us to IAM console. You can find your canonical ID there. If you remember, we have been using that S3 API command for a long time. When we list the object, this command returns as the owner ID, that is the canonical ID. Look, this is the canonical ID for my user. I want to skip this CLI way of doing this ACLs. ACLs are the old way of giving up permissions. No one today uses it. If you have done this process using CLI, share your experience with me in the comment section. Now let's learn what is this block public access mean. Now we know ACLs are the old way and they do not have granular level of access to objects and buckets, and they can't be used unless we turn off this block public access. Forgive me, I forgot to mention, using ACLs we can only give permissions to other AWS account, whether it can be users, groups, anyone. Okay, so what is this block public access mean? For that I'll take you to my console. These are the buckets in my account. If I click this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket and if I select this permissions tab, there is a block public access. If I click this edit button, I'll zoom now a little bit for you so that you all can see. Block public access. Public access is granted to buckets and objects through ACLs, bucket policies and access point policies or all. We'll look at these bucket policies and access point policies. In order to ensure that public access to all your S3 buckets and objects is blocked, turn on this block all public access. These settings apply only to this bucket and its access points. So to turn off the public access to buckets and objects, one has to use this block public access setting. Block all public access. Turning this setting on is the same as turning on all 4 settings below. Each of the following settings is independent of one another. So there are 4 points below. I'll try to explain these 4 points in detail for you. Block public access to buckets and objects granted through new ACLs. So what does that mean? There is something written. S3 will block public access permissions applied to newly added buckets or objects and prevent the creation of new public ACLs for existing buckets and objects. Very confusing, right? I'll explain you what does this point mean. This specific setting blocks any new public access for buckets and objects which are granted through ACLs. For example, if someone tries to create a new ACL to make a bucket or an object public, that request will be denied. But if the object or a bucket which already have an ACLs that allow public access, this setting does not modify those ACLs. In one line, new ACLs which make public won't be allowed and existing public ACLs won't be disturbed. And the next one, block public access to buckets and objects granted through any ACLs. S3 will ignore all ACLs that grant public access to buckets and objects, which means S3 ignores all the new public ACLs as well as existing public ACLs. For example, after enabling this setting, if you try to create a new public ACL, it will be created, but S3 ignores it. Don't worry, I'll show you everything hands-on, both using UI and CLI. And the next one, block public access to buckets and objects granted through new bucket or access point policies. I hope no explanation is required for this point. And the next one, block public and cross-account access to buckets and objects through any bucket or access point policies. S3 ignores public access for buckets or access points with policies that grant public access. I hope this also doesn't need any specific explanation. For now, we only know ACLs, right? For fun.
Just for fun, man.
Let's enable one of the first 2 settings and try giving public ACLs to buckets and objects. Firstly using UI and next using CLI. All you know that these are my buckets in my account. I'll open this Cloud Newbie.1023 bucket. I have deleted all my objects in this bucket. I'll now open this permissions tab. Now this block all public access was turned on. Now I'll click edit to select one of the thing. I'll now uncheck that block all public access. Now I'll select that first one. Block public access to buckets and objects granted through new ACLs. What this will do? This will block me when I try to create a new ACLs which make objects or buckets public. But this doesn't affect buckets or objects that are already public. Now I'll hit save changes. It was asking me to confirm. I'll write confirm and hit confirm. I'll now go down a little bit. Here it is access control list. Please note that this ACL is at the bucket level. I'll now click edit. I have already selected this list and read. Under this everyone public access, this means everyone in the internet can list the objects in this bucket. Note that there is a difference between list the object and get the object. By enabling this list checkbox, anyone can list all the objects in this bucket. Now I have to acknowledge this checkbox. When I try to save these changes, I got an error. You don't have permissions to edit this ACL settings. This is because we are now blocked to create ACLs which make these objects and buckets public. I'll now hit cancel. There is something missing. There is no fun here, right? Now let's upload the object and try to create a new ACL which make that object public. I'll now hit this objects tab. I'll click on this upload button to upload an object. I'll click on this add files. I'll scroll down a little bit to find an interesting video. Okay, when I hit this upload button, it is taking time. Yes, the object was successfully uploaded. I'll now hit this close button. Okay, there is this object in this bucket. I'll now click this object. Now what do you think will happen when I hit this object URL link? As expected, I got this access denied error. I'll now go back. Look, there is a permissions tab in this object level as well. When I hit that permissions tab, here we have ACLs. I'll now click on that edit button. Look, there is something written on the top. Public access is blocked because block public access setting are turned on for this bucket. Look, this was not allowing us to make this object public. Everything is grayed out here. Now I'll turn off that block public access. I'll now hit cancel. I'll click on this Cloud Newbie 1023. I'll now hit this permissions tab on this bucket level. I'll click on this edit in the block public access. I'll now uncheck this block public access. When I hit save changes, okay, it was asking me to confirm. I'll write confirm and I'll hit confirm. Now this setting should allow me to create a new ACL which make my object or bucket public. Now when I try to hit this link, what do you think will happen now? Again we got an access denied error. Just by allowing a public access to buckets or objects doesn't mean that anyone can access. It's like opening a door to a room. It doesn't mean anyone can walk in, right? Someone still has to invite them to a room, right? In the same way, just by allowing a public access to buckets or objects doesn't mean that anyone can access it. We have to still give permissions. I'll hit this permissions again. I'll click on this edit to edit the object level ACLs. Look, the message and grayed out part is gone. Now I can give permissions. When I check this box, it means I'm allowing everyone in the internet to access this object. I'll click on this checkbox. There is an object name mentioned here. When I click save changes, when I click this link, what do you think will happen now? Yes, now we can able to access this object. Okay, I'll come back. I'll click on this Cloud Newbie 1023 and I'll again click this permissions tab. I'll now click on this edit. Now I'll hit this checkbox. Now what this has to do? It should block any new public ACLs and it should ignore the previously existing public ACLs. Now let's check by accessing that object. I'll write confirm and hit confirm. Now I'll click on this objects tab. Click on this object. When I click this object URL link, yes, I can view this object. This confirms that block new public ACL setting blocks new ACL which makes public and ignores already existing public ACLs. Okay, I'll now go back. I'll click on this Cloud Newbie 1023. I'll click on this permissions and I'll again click on this edit. Now let's explore this second setting. Block public access to buckets and objects granted through any ACLs. This setting will ignore all the public ACLs to buckets or objects. I click on the save changes. It was asking me to confirm. I'll write and hit. Now I'll click on this objects tab. I'll click this object. Now what do you think will happen when I click this object URL link? This gave me access denied error again. Now do you understand what this second setting will do? It ignores all the public ACLs, whether it can be new or already existing. I'll now again go back. I'll click on this permissions tab. Look here, we gave read access to this object to everyone, right? But there is nothing here. I'll now click on this edit button. Look, it disappeared. It's gone.
It's gone.
Now I'll check this box and I'll acknowledge this. When I hit save changes, it was showing successfully edited ACLs. I'll click on this permission. Look, again it ignored. Look, it was not blocking us. It was ignoring us. I hope now you could able to understand what those two settings are. Now to understand the remaining two settings, you need to understand the bucket policies and access point policies. Now it's time for CLI way of doing this block public access. Okay, now I'm in this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket. Now I'll click this permissions tab. Look, this block all public access was turned on. Now I'll take you to my terminal. Now I'll write export AWS CLI auto prompt equal to on partial, so that AWS auto prompts me while I type commands. Okay, there is something wrong with this command. Okay, instead of underscore, I kept hyphen. When I hit enter, the environment variable was set. Now I'll write AWS S3 API and hit enter for the auto prompt. Yes, it started suggesting me. Here I'll write put public access block. It was asking me to provide the bucket name. I'll write Cloud Newbie 1023. Now it was asking me to provide this configuration. I'll select this public access block configuration. When I hit space, look, there are 4 options. These 4 options here are the 4 options in the console. We have block public ACLs, ignore public ACLs, block public policy, restrict public buckets. If I select this block public ACLs, I'll now write false to turn off that setting. By default, this option will be set to true. I'll try to show you. I'll hit Ctrl C to quit. I'll again write AWS S3 API and hit enter. I have written put public access block to set the configuration. And there might be get public access block to get the configuration. And yes, there it is. It was asking me to provide the bucket name. I'll write Cloud Newbie 1023. I think I don't need to provide any other configuration. I'll hit enter. Look, by default, all the 4 options are set to true, blocking all public access. I'll now copy the above command. I'll paste here. Okay, when I hit enter, now only the first setting must be set to false and remaining must be set to true. I'll now copy this get public access block command. I'll paste here. When I hit enter, oh, every setting was set to false. I'll go to the console and check. When I hit refresh, okay, all options are unchecked. I think I need to give all the 4 options. I'll again copy the command and paste here. If I hit enter, the setting will be applied. How would I get this auto prompt? I'll give comma and hit enter so that the command will be incomplete. There is ignore public ACLs option. I'll set this to true. And the next one, block public policy. I'll set this to true. And the next option, restrict public buckets. Let's set this to false. When I hit enter, now the settings are successfully saved. Now let's check how it was applied. I'll copy the same get public access block. Now I'll paste here. Look, the configuration, false, true, true, false. This is what we applied, right? I'll now check it on the console. When I hit refresh, I'll now click on this edit. Look, these first and last options are unchecked and second and third options are checked. True means to block and false means to allow. Okay, now let's learn what is this bucket policy mean. So what is this bucket policy? A bucket policy is a JSON document that is attached to an S3 bucket that defines permissions for accessing the buckets and its objects. So just like ACLs, bucket policies are also used to grant the permissions, like who can access the resources, who can't. But policies offer more granular level of control, like for suppose allowing only few IP addresses to access the resources and allowing to access the resources at only specific time, and also restricting users to perform only specific actions like get, put, delete. Through ACLs we can't do this, right? It allows you to control access to the buckets and objects for AWS account, IAM users or any other external users. So what this policy contain? Version. The version defines the policy language format. Always set it to 2012-10-17. This is the latest version. Next is statement. The statement block contains all the rules for the policy. It's an array, so you can have multiple rules. Next is effect. Specifies whether to allow or deny access. Allow grants permissions, deny denies the permissions. It overrides any allow rules. Next is principal. Defines who can access the bucket. If you put star for principal, it means everyone can access the bucket. If you want AWS account or IAM user to access the bucket, then you have to write ARN of the user. For suppose if you want a specific role to access the bucket, then you have to write ARN of the role. Next is action, which specifies what actions are allowed or denied. For suppose if you write S3 get object, this operation allows downloading objects. For suppose if you write effect as allow, principal as star, and action is S3 get object, then this policy allows everyone to download the object. We'll look at more real world examples in this video. Just bear 5 minutes with me, I'll explain all this. If you use S3 star, then this is for all operations. Next is resource. This specifies to which bucket or object this policy applies. You have to write ARN of the bucket. And for the object, you have to put / and then object name. If you put star, it applies to all the objects in the bucket. Next is condition. This is optional. This adds extra restrictions using keys and values. As I already said, using bucket policies, you can restrict specific IP addresses, right? This is the place where you have to put that IP address. Using conditions, you can even enforce encryption during uploads. S3 objects are by default encrypted using S3 managed keys. But if you want, objects that are uploaded to this bucket are encrypted using KMS or any other encryption algorithms, then you can use this condition. Okay, that's it.
That's all.
Now let's combine everything and let's have a look how the policy looks like. A policy template. A bucket policy is a JSON document. The first line of the policy is the version and this is fixed. And next is a statement. It's an array of rules. The first line of every rule is effect, which accepts, allow or deny. Next line is principal, who can access, whether it can be a role, user, anyone. Next is action, what actions are allowed or denied, like get, put, delete, anything. Next is resource, which bucket or objects. Next is condition, under which conditions this access is granted or denied. Okay, this is how a basic bucket policy template looks like. You can provide multiple permissions by giving comma in the statements array and repeating the same. I hope you understood the basic policy template. Let's jump into real world use cases. Okay, now I am in this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket. I'll now hit this permissions tab. Block all public access was turned on. I'll go down a little bit to find the bucket policy. Here it is. I'll click on edit. Look, here is one button, policy generator. I'll click on that. I'll select S3 bucket policy. Through this we can generate bucket policies. Effect was allowed. Next is principal. What is this principal? I already said who can access the bucket. If you click on denied, access will be denied. If you click allow, access will be allowed to the given principal. Now let's take a scenario that we have to allow only a specific user to access this Cloud Newbie bucket and its objects, and we should not allow anyone to access this bucket and its objects inside it. Now what we have to give as a principal? The ARN of a user. For that we have to create a user. I'll take you to my terminal to create a user. We can create users using IAM command. Okay, I got some error. I again need to set this environment variable AWS CLI auto prompt equal to unpartial. I'll write AWS IAM and hit enter. Is there any command called create user? Look, there it is. It was asking me to provide the username. I'll select a user KGF. I think that's it. I'll hit enter. Look, we got an ARN of a user. I'll now copy this ARN. Now I'll take you to the policy generator. I'll paste that ARN in this principal. Next is actions. Look, how many actions? That is the power of bucket policy. Using ACLs we can't do this, right? There are many actions over here. Which actions we should select? Let's select this list bucket. Look, there is a list all my buckets action as well. How this action is going to work, I don't know. This bucket policy is restricted to a bucket itself. How can the permissions attached to the bucket can affect all the other buckets? Try this option and let me know in the comments. So we have selected get object and list bucket. Now ARN, which means resource, on which bucket or object that we wanted to apply these permissions. We want to apply on this Cloud Newbie bucket, right? I'll now copy the ARN of the bucket. I'll paste here. I'll now click on this add statement. Look, the statement was generated. Now I'll click on this generate policy button. Now this is our bucket policy. Now this policy allows user KGF to get object and list bucket on this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket. Now I'll cd into the policies folder. I already have it. I'll type ls. I'll open this policies0.json file. I'll write vi policies0.json. Now I'll paste this policy. Now this policy allows user KGF to list bucket, which means list all the objects inside this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket. There is a get object action. We need to mention which object inside this bucket we need to get. Okay, anyways, this is AWS suggested. I'll save the file. Now what I have to write? Now we need to apply this bucket policy, right? I'll write AWS S3 API and hit enter. We used put public access block. Is there anything put bucket policy? There it is, put bucket policy. I'll select that one. It was asking me to provide the bucket name. I'll write Cloud Newbie 1023. Now it was asking me to provide the policy. I have to write file : //. This is because we are uploading a file, right? Without this file : //, this command won't work. By giving also it didn't work. What was this error message? Malformed policy when calling the put bucket policy operation. Action does not apply to any resources in the statement. I already said, right, which object inside this bucket we want to get. I'll make this resource as an array of resources. I'll copy the same ARN above and paste it below. And I'll write /*. Now the meaning of the policy is it allows user KGF to list bucket, means list all the objects in the Cloud Newbie 1023 and get all the objects in the Cloud Newbie 1023. I think now you might be confused. For suppose if I write this d.mb4, this is the object we have in the bucket, right? Now the action get object means the user KGF can able to download this d.mb4 object in this Cloud Newbie bucket. And that is the difference between get object and list bucket actions. I'll replace with star again. When I save this file, I'll copy the same above command. I paste here. When I hit enter and the policy was successfully saved. Now let's test. Now I'll execute the AWS commands on behalf of KGF user. But to execute AWS commands, I need that access ID and secret access key, right? I'll write AWS IAM and hit enter. Is there anything called create access key? There it is. It was asking me to provide the username. I'll write KGF. And I'll hit enter. I got access key ID and secret access key. Now I'll write AWS configure, but I don't want to permanently to switch to that KGF user. I'll write -- profile. Sorry, I forgot to put the KGF. AWS configure profile KGF. This -- profile and username KGF means without permanently switching to the KGF user, temporarily I'm executing AWS commands on behalf of the KGF user. Now I'll hit enter and these settings are saved. Now this KGF user is authenticated and will be able to run all the AWS commands. I'll write AWS S3 ls Cloud Newbie 1023. When I hit enter, it gave me d.mb4. I executed this command on behalf of the root user. When I run this command on behalf of the KGF user by -- profile KGF, when I hit enter, look, it gave me objects inside this bucket. If I remove this Cloud Newbie 1023 and simply write AWS S3 ls -- profile KGF, yes, it gave me access denied error, as KGF user is not allowed to list all the buckets in my account. Now I'll take you to my IAM console. There are two users, Gautam and KGF. I'll click this KGF. There are no permissions set to this KGF user. Now I'll try to explain you in simple English how this IAM policy and bucket policy work together.
Simple English. No confusion.
So first, when you hit AWS S3 command, it checks whether you have a permissions in the IAM to perform this action or not. First preference will be given to IAM and next to bucket policy. For example, we have written a bucket policy as user KGF can access this Cloud Newbie bucket and its objects. For suppose if any other user who has this get and list permissions defined on IAM, then they will also be able to access this bucket and objects. So here when we hit AWS S3 ls Cloud Newbie 1023 on behalf of the KGF user doesn't have any IAM permissions for S3. So by default, user cannot perform any S3 actions. But bucket policy grants list bucket and get object to KGF user, and that's why user could be able to get the objects. I hope now you could be able to understand. So what is our scenario? Except KGF user, we should not allow anyone to access this bucket and objects inside it. Now I'll take you to my terminal. I'll again open this policy 0.json file. This is the bucket policy that we have given to Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket, right? Oh, sorry, this is not the policy. I'll correct it. I'll write get object and list bucket in these actions. In the resource, we have to write /* right at the end. I think now this is the policy, right? Now what you might be thinking, now we have allowed KGF user to access the bucket and its objects. If I write deny everyone, then everyone will be denied. But this is wrong. I'll explain you why. I have copied that above statement below. To cut a line in VI editor, press escape and press DD. The line will be cut. Okay, now I'll write effect as deny. Now I have to put star in the place of this principal. Now what do you think this bucket will do? It allows user KGF to get object and list bucket in this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket, and it denies everyone to get object and list bucket in this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket. Okay, I'll save this file. Now what I have to do, I have to apply this bucket policy. I'll write AWS S3 API put bucket policy and -- bucket Cloud Newbie 1023 and -- policy file : / policy 0.json, and I'll hit enter. I have practiced these commands many times, and that's why I'm not taking help of autoprompt. Oh, I got an error. Okay, I have to put -- bucket. When I hit enter, the policy was successfully saved. Okay, if I write AWS S3 ls, it gave me buckets. If I write AWS S3 ls S3 : / Cloud Newbie 1023, Yes, we got an error with an explicit deny in resource-based policy. This is what we want, right? Now let's check whether the KGF user would be able to access the bucket or not. I'll repeat the same command, AWS S3 Cloud Newbie 1023 dash profile KGF. Now this command will be executed on behalf of KGF user. Oh, here also we got explicit deny in resource-based policy error. I'll open the policy file to explain you. Okay, the first statement was allowing permissions to user KGF. And the second statement was denying permission to everyone on this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket. So the second statement was overriding the first one. So this bucket policy is you are allowing and denying at the same time. So what we have to do now? So let's deny everyone to access this bucket except KGF user. How is the idea? But how to write the bucket policy like that? I'll now open this policy generator. I'll click this cancel and I'll go up a little bit. Now I'll click this deny. Whom we wanted to deny? Everyone, right? That's why I'll put star. Now what actions? Get object and list bucket, right? I'll select those things. Now resource name. On which bucket we are going to apply these permissions? Now I'll copy this bucket name. I'll now paste here. I'll click this add conditions button. There are conditions, key, value, and there are many conditions. I'll select string not equals. And in the key field, here also we have many options. I'll select this principal ARN. I'll select username. What is the value? I'll write KGF. Now the condition becomes string not equals to username KGF. If I would have selected principal ARN instead of username, then I would have given ARN of a user KGF. I'll now click on this generate policy button. Now this bucket policy denies everyone who performs get object and list bucket operation on this Cloud Newbie 1023 bucket, except who has a username KGF, which means user KGF. I'll now copy this policy. I'll again take you to my terminal. Okay, for a change, let's write policy in the VS Code. This is a policy. I'll clean up everything. I'll paste here now. I'll save the policy. I'll again take you to my terminal. I'll search this put bucket policy. Look, here I got. I'll hit enter. The policy must be saved now. Okay, we got an error. Malformed policy. Action does not apply to any resource in the statement. Let's check the policy once. Okay, here I forgot to put /* at the end. We blindly followed AWS policy generator. I'll save the policy now. When I try to run the command again, yes, now the policy was successfully executed. Okay, now if I write AWS S3 Cloud Newbie 1023, look, we got explicit deny in resource based policy error. I ran this command as a root user. This is what we are expecting, right? Now let's try running the same command as a KGF user. AWS S3 Cloud Newbie 1023 dash profile KGF. When I hit enter, look, now we got a different error. No identity based policy allows S3 list bucket action. What does this mean? Now I'll try to explain you. In the bucket policy, we have written deny everybody except KGF. Here we are not giving permissions to user KGF. But KGF user is a fresh user. He didn't have any permissions. Now let's give permissions to this user KGF. I don't know how to write this IAM policy. I'll again take the help of this policy generator. I'll select IAM policy. I'll put effect as allow, AWS service as S3, and actions are get object and list bucket. Now ARN, which means resource. I'll copy the bucket name. I'll paste here. Now we are giving get object and list bucket permissions to this KGF user. I'll click on this add statement button. I'll copy this IAM policy and back to VS Code. I'll paste here. Now I'll save this file. I'll take you to my terminal now. Now we have to create this policy and attach this policy to the user KGF. I'll write AWS IAM and hit enter. Is there anything called create policy? There it is. Now it was asking me to provide the policy name. I'll write allow S3 access. Now it was asking me to provide the document. Now I'll write file : / IAM policy.json. Now the policy was successfully created. Now I'll attach this policy to the user KGF. I'll write AWS IAM and hit enter. There it is. Attach user policy. I'll select that one. It was asking me to provide the username. I'll write KGF. Now it was asking for policy ARN. I'll copy that ARN. I'll paste here. Now when I hit enter, now the policy was successfully attached to the user KGF. Now if I write AWS S3 Cloud Newbie 1023, I got explicit deny error. But if I write AWS S3 Cloud Newbie 1023 dash profile KGF, yes, I got d.mb4. Now I hope you could able to understand how IAM policy and bucket policy work together. Now if you want to grant permissions to other AWS account to access your buckets and objects, what will you do? You will simply write the account ARN in this principal field. So, though other account users might not have permissions on our account through IAM, with this bucket policy, they will have permissions on our bucket. Okay, for suppose if you want users in your account to upload an object in the bucket only if it is encrypted using KMS. How will you do? Pause the video and think for 2 minutes. You need to do it in the same way like we allowed only user KGF to access the bucket. First of all, you will deny put object access on this bucket for everyone. And in condition, string not equals to KMS. I'll now take you to this policy generator. Look at this condition. If I click key, I'll now go down a little bit. Look, there is something called server-side encryption. I'll select that one and in the value, I'll write KMS. When I click add condition, now this is the condition to be mentioned in the bucket policy. Now for suppose, if you want to allow everyone to get the object from this Cloud Newbie bucket, then how will you write? You have to simply put star in the principal field. When I save this policy, when I run this put bucket policy command, I got an error. Public policies are blocked by the block public policy. Do you remember in a block public access setting, this third point, S3 blocks new bucket and access point policies that grant public access to buckets and objects. This setting was turned on and that's why we could not be able to make that object and bucket public. Okay, that's it for this video. I thought of creating a video on entire AWS S3 security, but that was not possible in this one video. In the next video, we'll look at access points, encryption, versioning and much more. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe.